The story itself, and I don't know how much people know about Russia. In America, it's not as well known as in the rest of the world, but it really takes place in the 90s when communism fell and capitalism was kind of placed there. And it was forced into place into the society that hadn't really had capitalism before. Yeltsin was the president of Russia. He was, drinking and dying throughout most of his presidency, very ill along the way. He was worried about communism coming back. So his idea, and the people around him, thought if we can quickly privatize this whole country, if we can actually force capitalism here by handing away most of the assets of the country to private people, we can create a hedge against communism. It won't be able to come back if it's already a private, thing. If all the businesses are private, communism goes away. So that was really his idea. So they basically handed the country away to these very ambitious men who came from nowhere. The main character of this book is a guy named Boris Berezovsky, who was known as the godfather of the Kremlin. He was a mathematician, he was an outsider, he was Jewish in a very anti-Semitic society. He wasn't allowed to go to regular schools, he wasn't allowed to get a regular job because of his ethnicity. When capitalism was placed in there, he became a car dealer, basically. He started buying up cars, and he used inflation to make a fortune. He would buy a car, but say, I'll pay you a year from now. By the time he paid for it, it was pennies on the dollar. He would have sold it in the meantime, and he built a massive fortune this way. He had car dealerships all over the country. Now, in 1994, he was a big businessman. He got into his limo and was on his way out when his limo was blown up. Someone attempted to assassinate him. His driver was decapitated. He was covered in burns, but he survived. And at that moment, he decided the only way to be safe in Russia is to become a politician as well as a businessman. And you needed a krisha. It's a roof. A roof protects the building. And the idea was in Russia, it comes from the mob, everyone has a roof. So he became a roof, essentially, a krisha. And he became a billionaire by worming his way into the Kremlin and into Yeltsin's family, with a capital F, who ran Russia at the time. Abramovich, Roman Abramovich is the other main character. He comes into the story a little bit later. They meet on a yacht in the Caribbean. Roman Abramovich is a toy salesman from Siberia. He's making rubber ducks and children's toys. He's an orphan, again Jewish, from nowhere. He has an idea of privatizing the oil industry and creating an oil company. He goes to Berezovsky and they partner up. It's just like the Facebook story. There's no shares, there's no lawyers, but essentially Berezovsky becomes his roof and they create Sibneft, which was the second largest oil company. In exchange, Roman Abramovich makes these huge payoffs. Every week, Berezovsky would call and they would send over a suitcase of cash, $3 million, $5 million, whatever he asked for, $100 million one year. And that was their relationship. And that's kind of the beginning of the story, and the money gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Berezovsky gets bigger and bigger. Roman becomes a billionaire. And then Yeltsin starts to fade. He's starting to die. And at this point in time, 7 oligarchs controlled 50% of Russia's GDP. I mean, that's an incredible statistic. These 7 men owned most of the country. And they decided we need to install someone who's the next president who we can control. Someone who's a nobody, a cog, a low-level guy that we can, groom, and then we own the country, just as we did with Yeltsin. So they found a guy named Vladimir Putin. Putin was a KGB agent, not a high-level guy. He was the assistant to the mayor of St. Petersburg. He had helped Berezovsky set up a car dealership. And that's really how Berezovsky knew him. Yeltsin liked him because he seemed like a very loyal man. He was a cog. They would call him a cog. And they basically installed him as president. Yeltsin gave up his seat, which was something unheard of, in 2000 at the millennium. He retired, handing the seat to Putin, who was then elected and became president. Now, the oligarchs had made a miscalculation. Putin was not a weak man. The minute he took power, he invited all of the oligarchs to Stalin's old house. This is a place where there are bullet holes in the walls, where people have been lined up and shot. All of the oligarchs, who are billionaires, were sat at a table, and he came in front of them, Putin, and he said, "You've all done very well. You've all made a lot of money. You can keep your money, just stay out of my way." And that was the beginning of a change in everything.